There's a starman waiting in the sky. He'd like to come and meet us, but he thinks he'd blow our minds. There's a starman waiting in the sky. He's told us not to blow it, 'cause he knows it's all worthwhile. He told me, let the children lose it, let the children use it, let all the children do get. Look out your window, I can see his light. If we can sparkle, he may land tonight. Don't tell your papa, or he'll get us locked up in fights. There's a starman waiting in the sky. He'd like to come and meet us, but he thinks he'd blow our minds. There's a starman waiting in the sky. He's told us not to blow it, 'cause he knows it's all worthwhile. He told me, let the children lose it, let the children use it, let all the children boogie. Starman waiting in the sky. He'd like to come and meet us, but he thinks he'd blow our minds. There's a starman waiting in the sky. He's told us not to blow it, 'cause he knows it's all worthwhile. He told me, let the children lose it, let the children use it, let all the children boogie.
Are you enjoying this conference? Yes? This is a incredibly gifted, incredibly diverse group of speakers, and this is what we try to do at Earthkeeper, is to combine the science with the sacred. And the people that bring the science in are absolutely as important to the integral circle as the sacred. One of the things that we say is that science omits the sacred and the sacred omits the scientific. And so that is our goal, to bring these two together. And there is a complete circle that will occur when these two come together. So it's a great honor to introduce one of my heroes, David Hatcher Childress. I was a speaker at the ARE 2 years ago, and David was also a speaker. So was Greg Braden. And Dr. Greg Braden got up and said something that I can totally relate to. And he said that it was the work of David Hatcher Childress that brought him into the investigations of alternative histories. And it was, for me, also a great truth that it is the books of David Hatcher Childress, the body of work provided by David Hatcher Childress, that opened a new generation, that gave others the ability to follow the trail that he had blazed. And so this is the real Indiana Jones. These books, yes, a round of applause, please. David Hatcher Childress. David has visited countless countries, examined numerous hundreds of places that are mysterious because they don't fit into the understanding that mainstream academics have of where we began. And so his work has inspired so many. And his life has been spent in providing light where there is shadow, clarity where there is confusion. David is also the voice of the History Channel's Ancient Alien series. And he will speak tonight, as you can see, ancient aliens, ancient technology, and megalithic buildings. And so an Earthkeeper round of applause to honor David Hatcher Childress.
Okay, great. All right, I'll put this here, and thanks, Tib. So, well, it's great to be here, and I was at Tib's conference in Little Rock a couple of years ago, and that was good. So, I recognize some of you from that. That's great. Tell you a little bit about myself. I'm born in France. However, my parents are Americans. In fact, my father is from Colorado, and I grew up in Colorado too. As a little kid, I lived in Denver and Lakewood over here to the north of the airport. And my father was from Durango, actually, so I really grew up in southwest Colorado, in Durango. Later, my parents got divorced, and my mother, my brother, and I moved up to Missoula, Montana. And in fact, and Graham Hancock in his presentation talked about Lake Missoula, if you recall. I do want to say what we're going to see here today from me, and then I'll have another presentation tomorrow. There will be a lot of similarity between, and some of the slides I show, between Graham Hancock's and Robert Schoch's too. But I think there'll be enough difference and unusual things that that you'll enjoy it, and you won't mind that. My presentation is going to be pretty fast and furious, and it would be good if we dim all the lights. I have a pretty loud voice too, and sometimes I get excited. I do want to say a little bit about Ancient Aliens. Yes, show. I don't write that show. And, it's fun to be on it. I enjoy it. Giorgio, by the way, is a very good friend of mine. And he's a great guy. And you got to ask, what's with that guy's hair, Whenever somebody, stops me at an airport or something, and they're like, "You're that guy in Ancient Aliens, aren't you?" And I'm like, yeah. What's with that guy's hair? He's a great guy. So, and in fact, this summer, I'm going to Australia with Eric von Däniken, and we're doing some conferences all over Australia for Nexus magazine. And that will be fun. I am on the show, Ancient Aliens. Tomorrow, what we're about to see right now is a lot of megalith building. We're going to go to South America and around the world, and then we're going to see some cone heads and unusual skeletons. This might be the ancient alien part. I don't ascribe everything to Ancient Aliens at all. I'm really more of a ancient civilizations person, and Atlantis, and that civilization goes back many tens of thousands of years. But there's the Ancient Alien Part 2, and tomorrow in the presentation, we'll do giant stone balls around the world, obelisks, Nikola Tesla stuff, and then we'll go to the moon and Mars. And that's all tomorrow. Today we'll stay pretty much earthbound. So let's go ahead and try and dim the lights, and let's go. So these are the ruins at Malta, and until the discovery of Göbekli Tepe, mainstream archaeologists basically said that the oldest megalithic ruins in the world were on Malta, and that they were from around 7,000 BC, and now they're saying that Göbekli Tepe is from like 9,600 BC. On Malta, by the way, is this cave, the Gar Dalam Cave. This is evidence that Malta and the whole Mediterranean was hit by a giant tidal wave sometime in prehistory. It washed all these woolly, little pygmy woolly mammoths and hippos and things like that into this cave, and then they recovered the bones. So the idea that at that time the Mediterranean perhaps was filled in. Mainstream archaeologists tell us that there's over 200 known sunken cities in the Mediterranean, and they weren't built underwater. Here's Göbekli Tepe. We already saw some of that from both Schock and Graham Hancock, and the T-shaped megaliths. Graham also pointed out, these animals that are on the T-shaped megaliths and things at Göbekli Tepe. I was there with my wife about 5 years ago or so. And some models of it. As Graham pointed out, what's important about Göbekli Tepe 2 was that it was built as this megalithic site, and then it was buried. It was purposely buried, and so the uncovering of it gives them good dating, and so they use the carbon dating. My personal interests have always been huge megaliths, the bigger the better, and how they would be moved. And I also am known for writing books on anti-gravity, Tesla, things like that. This is Baalbek, and Graham was talking about that earlier. That was great that he was able to go there. The largest known cut stone block in the world, they are the ones at Baalbek, and they weigh over 1,000 tons. And so the idea is partly with me and my books is why are people trying to build with such gigantic stones? And again, from our perspective and certainly from mainstream archaeology perspective, this is just people are taking on some kind of monumental task that just seems so incredible. I mean, why would they even try to build like this? And with me, and what I constantly am trying to get out is that it had to be easy for them to do these things and not so incredibly difficult. Mainstream archaeology has to try to explain all this stuff. How are you going to move a 1,000-ton block of stone? Some years ago, a mainstream French archaeologist came up, this is his explanation, that to move these giant blocks of stone, they had to build a huge cage around this 1,000-ton block of stone. There would be small little hourglass notches put into the top of the stone with all these pulleys in the cage, and then you would lift this giant stone a few inches above the ground and move it a few inches, and then you'd have to redo the whole thing. This is the only way the mainstream can conceive of moving these stones. Also, by the way, what the foundation of King Solomon's temple in Jerusalem, and today it's known as the Dome of the Rock with the mosque there and the Wailing Wall, there are giant blocks of stone like at Baalbek there as well, but they're hard to see because they're inside of a tunnel. Going to Abydos, Egypt, here's what we're looking at. This is the tomb of Osiris, the Osirion in Abydos. Abydos has also a dynastic temple there, but there's also this, what it seems to be a pre-Egyptian building, and that is the Osirion. And as we look at it, most of the Osirion was underwater in a swamp, and the Egyptian government literally spent decades pumping the water out of the Osirion just so they could see what was there and what the giant blocks are. And so if you will look at some of these little knobs and notches that are on these blocks, and they're at the Osirion, and we're going to see these again in Peru. And that's where we are now. So we're in Cuzco. This is one of the jigsaw walls in Cuzco made with granite. This is the famous 12-sided stone in an alleyway in Cuzco. And in fact, this appears on the label of the Cusqueña beer. And in fact, in Cuzco, I've been told there's only one industry in that entire city, and it's the beer brewery. So here we are. Graham was showing some of that, the polygonal jigsaw stone masonry that you have in Peru. And that kind of a masonry, too, is the blocks of stone are all locked together like a jigsaw puzzle, no mortar. And so when a shock wave of an earthquake hits, it's all locked together, and the stones can survive massive earthquake shocks. This is actually the Necromonticon, which is in northern Greece, northwest Greece, near to Albania. And this was only discovered by archaeologists in the 1960s, but it has the same kind of jigsaw pattern and stonework that you also find in Peru. This is the Sacsayhuaman giant fortress, or whatever it was. I think it was some kind of Vamana airport. There were towers here, too. There's an aerial view of it. Right in front of the zigzag giant walls of Sacsayhuaman is this huge, huge field, open area. And for me, and I'll get into this a little bit more later and more tomorrow, the whole idea of ancient flight, of airships, landing even these airships onto these giant fields. Machu Picchu has that too. And has a huge sort of like landing field, kind of flat football field right in the center of Machu Picchu. Cusco is such a fantastic place, and as Graham Hancock was saying, it's also my opinion the Incas did not build Sacsayhuaman or Machu Picchu or even Cusco. And in fact, the way I try to explain it to people, and oftentimes, they're like, well, what do you mean the Incas didn't build, the city? How could that be? Today, when you're in Cusco, and these are still shots of Sacsayhuaman. Today, when you go to Cusco, you'll see people who are, in many cases, descendants of, say, Spanish. They're living in these megalithic buildings, too, in Cusco. But they didn't build them. I mean, these buildings are indestructible. And even the big earthquakes in Peru can't destroy these buildings, but the later Spanish ones are often destroyed. In Cusco and around there, these unusual blocks that are all carved up and upside down staircases and things like that. It's like there was some cataclysm. What I'm going to be showing you too is the idea that these people are using power tools. Power tools like we have today. Drills, saws, grinders, even plasma cutters and things like that. And it would almost seem in certain places around Cusco and Sacsayhuaman that people with these power tools are just going out and playing with them and using them, practicing even. And that's what mainstream archaeologists are saying here. They're saying, oh yeah, well the Inca stone cutters, they would go to these giant boulders and carve upside down staircases and things like that just to practice, right? And so there may be something to that. Around Sacsayhuaman too, and throughout Peru, there is evidence of a vast tunnel system going underground. There are areas around Sacsayhuaman and other areas of Peru, and I've been inside some of these tunnels, not for any great length, but there are areas where this solid granite is cut through with tunnels and things like that. It's whoever was building these things, they were going through what would seem like a lot of effort and doing some amazing stuff, cutting through solid rock and building with gigantic blocks of granite, or in some cases basalt and sandstone and limestone. Again, the mainstream are saying, yeah, it's just, you get just so many thousand and hundreds of people dragging on a block of stone, you can move it. And there's some mathematical figure for that. And even the idea that they would have had to have hundreds of people all in harnesses and a special thing. But there's a problem with that. And even the mainstream archaeologists who will tackle this, and there's not many, and that is because at certain places, like at Ollantay Tambo, where these megalithic structures are on small knife ridges and cliffs, and they can't figure out where the 500 or 800 guys would all stand. So these are some of the problems that the mainstream, is going through with, and part of my job as a critic of mainstream archaeology is to know what their explanations are, and if they have some flaws in what their explanations are, then I I go there. Machu Picchu. Machu Picchu is the most popular tourist site in all of South America. It gets more and more popular all the time. With a lot of the troubles in Egypt now, many people who would really go to Egypt on a vacation now are going to Peru, and it's great for the Peruvian economy. I've been going to Peru since the mid-'80s. I've been there when it was a curfew. I've been attacked on the streets because the police were all on strike. And the economy just totally, gone down the tubes. But now, and I'm so glad of this, that Peru's economy and the government, everybody is getting it together, so it's a great place to go. I hope you will go there. Machu Picchu is a megalithic city. It's a secret city on top of a mountain. It's also built, you notice these knobs and things like that. You also see that this is granite, huge lichen patches on there. And these knobs are similar to what we were seeing at the Osirion at Abydos. Places like this is also part of Machu Picchu. Very fine cutting and fitting of these blocks. Machu Picchu is an astonishing place. This is actually my favorite place in Peru, and it's called Ollantaytambo. And in fact, it's on the Urubamba River going down to Machu Picchu. And as you go up these stairs right up here, if you're a tourist, you're going to hike up these big terraces here. And right above this cliff right here that we're talking about is the giant sun temple of Ollantaytambo. And it's sitting right on top of a cliff on a knife-edge place. And this is, again, where the problem is, where the 300 or 900 guys who are all dragging the blocks up, how can they stand? And also turn corners and things like that on the ramps and things that are going up. As you're walking up to Ollantaytambo, you eventually start going up these stairs, and then you get into these megalithic jigsaw walls, and they're out of granite. And again, you see these curious knobs. Archaeologists can't really explain these knobs. They don't know why. They assume they have something to do with the building, but they can't really put their fingers on it. One of the standard explanation would be that somehow what they're doing is, because the blocks are so perfectly fitted together, and you can't even get a razor blade or a piece of paper between them. They're so perfect. But to make that perfection, again, would be this very piddly, moving the block up and then putting beams under it, and then all this little tedious hammering to make sure it fit just perfectly. But still, that's not really such a good explanation. Yet, again, we don't know exactly. Another interesting explanation here would be using what's called a plasma cutter, which would be like a lightsaber in the Star Wars movies, which would be an electrified gas with super power in it, and you could melt stone. There's a scene in Revenge of the Sith where Liam Neeson and Ewan McGregor, as Jedi Knights, are trapped in this space station, and they're in this room, and to get out, they shove their lightsabers into this vault door and start melting it. If you've seen that movie, that's a great scene. And so, in a sense, if you had something like this, and it's cutting stone or even melting stone, as you pulled that plasma cutter, there's going to be a super hot electrified gas that's melting stone. As you pulled it out of the stone, it could create, in theory, these little knobs like this. It's just an idea. As you get up there to the very top of the Sun Temple, as they call it, at Ollantaytambo, this is what you start to see. Gigantic blocks of granite. And they're just kind of stacked around. They're lying there. This is exactly how Ollantaytambo looks today. It's how it looked when the Spanish got there. It's how it looked in Inca times, just like this. This is the main thing that you see, and everyone stands in front of this wall. It's really the only wall that's intact there. And these very thin pieces of granite here are also very unusual. And so you have megalithic blocks, and then these fine pieces of thin granite that also carved in there. Very strange. So you're looking at something like this along the side of Ollantaytambo. Now here's what the mainstream archaeologists are saying. They're saying, yeah, they dragged this giant block of granite up here, and then they notched it and whatnot, and then they just filled it in with all this like crummy rubble, right? That's how the Incas built stuff. So yeah, once again, I mean, this is some probably 300-ton block of granite. It's got these unusual squares on it. Once again, it's been notched right here. That notch is clearly for some other giant block of granite to be fitted there, but that never really happened, and instead the Incas just filled it in with this crummy rubble. So what we might say, you know, this crummy rubble, this is Inca construction, and the giant blocks are something else, Atlantean construction, alien construction, or even Sumerian construction, but somebody is using power tools, even anti-gravity. They have the ability to levitate giant blocks of stone. And all these other blocks of stone that are just sitting here and stacked up, I mean, somebody brought them up there, and either it's from a building that was completely blasted out in some, you know, ancient super war where a missile or something hit this building and just threw it around, or they got all these blocks up there and intended, the real builders, you know, they intended to stack all these blocks up and make something, but they weren't able to finish. And something happened. I mean, just all the construction just came instantly to a complete halt. Now, when you're also there at Ollantaytambo, you start to see, if you look at these blocks of stone carefully, you see this very fine articulation of the stone, this little grooves and things cut. I mean, they wanted and were going to fit these stones, giant stones, all together in a very, you know, perfect way. Now, what you also see there is this, and this is what's known as a keystone cut. This T-shaped cut here, and there's one on the other side. You can see it there. And these, take a note of this because we're going to see more of these. Here's a close-up. This is a cut in a granite block at Ollantaytambo. It's known as a keystone cut. So there's going to be another one of these on another corresponding, and then molten metal is poured into it. And it has to be lying flat. It has to be lying flat so that metals can be poured into it. And so you would have a double T-shaped metal clamp, probably a bronze or something, that's now spanning the two giant blocks. And what's funny is these are huge blocks anyway, and they weigh a lot. You wouldn't think they're really going anywhere. But yeah, they want to put these extra little clamps on there too. And so we call them keystone cuts, and then the metal pieces are called clamps or sometimes cramps. So here we go. We're looking at another keystone cut here. But now, if you walk around sort of this back side of the Sun Temple, we're right nearby, there's another giant stone. And again, the crummy Inca masonry here, and here's a keystone cut. But that's, you know, this is not something that is useful. This can't be where this stone was meant to go. You cannot use a keystone cut here because it can't be on a vertical wall. It has to be on a flat wall because the molten metal is poured into it. So this is a block that's been put somewhere where it really shouldn't be. Now, across the river from Ollantaytambo, and we're going up there. There's the Urubamba River, and in fact, the temple itself that we were just looking at is right up here on top of these cliffs. These are some fields. Here's the Urubamba River here, and in fact, the quarry, which is where we're going right now, is on this giant granite mountain, which is across the river from the megalithic site. So this is the quarry, and it's an unusual quarry too because it's actually a giant pile of granite scree coming off this cliff face. And it's several thousand feet. Most tourists never get up to this area. It's an all-day walk. I've been up there about 3 times. Twice I rode horses up there. And the horses can't even go all the way. As you get up to the quarry site, what they are doing there is they take giant granite boulders and then they start slicing them with apparently a giant saw. And what you see here, these are actually, they're starting to saw like a loaf of bread. They're going to saw off this granite piece right here. Now, supposedly, the Incas didn't know about writing, and they didn't know about the wheel. And yet, when you get up to the quarry up there, there's this Fred Flintstone, stone wheel there. And it, too, has been sliced. I mean, some giant saw has just cut this thing, and it's very smooth. All right, we'll go back to Cuzco, and we're in the Coricancha, the famous Sun Temple that was used by the Incas, and was for a while after the Spanish conquest. It was a monastery, a nunnery. Then it was partially destroyed in an earthquake in 1950, and that exposed some of these walls. And what you see there is also a megalithic building, but you start to see, again, a lot of articulation and these holes in the walls. And it's like some kind of machine or something. It was placed in these walls, and that there are holes and conduits for electrical cables and things like that to go through it. And there's a lot of very fancy articulation. It's very well made. We'll go now higher up into the Andes to Lake Titicaca, and there's a number of plateaus there. This is going up to a site called Cutimbo, and Graham Hancock showed a couple of photos of Cutimbo there too. On the way up to Cutimbo, there's this oddball spot, and where it looks like, again, power tools and polishing tools have been used to like smooth off the rock and polish it. I couldn't figure out what this was all about. And you can see the sudden roughness here and this line, but then the stone's very smooth. So again, it looks like somebody with some kind of special power tools and grinders and buffers and things like that was playing around in this rock. You get to Cutimbo, it has these megalithic towers. They're also with a polygonal type of granite. And like at Göbekli Tepe, they have there are serpents and other animals, pumas and things like that are in relief in some of the blocks. And it's interesting, the serpents, because you see this also in Cuzco, and we'll see that again. These are some pumas and other animals, and again, as Graham Hancock pointed out, at Göbekli Tepe, you have this kind of thing too, the megaliths with just animals featured on them. This is a block of stone, a wall that's right near the Plaza de Armas, the main plaza in Cuzco, and it too has just some of the stones will have these wavy serpents carved into it. Now, if you go to the Yazidi temples in northern Iraq, and the Yazidis are this ancient Iraqi, Sumerian, Armenian, whatever religion, one of the oldest religions in the world. They've recently been coming into the news. Most people have never even heard of Yazidis, but yeah, because of all the ISIS stuff in Syria and Iraq, and the kidnapping, ISIS has taken over Yazidi villages and enslaved all the people. But they have these temples, and their temples too have these serpents on the walls. And there's not many Yazidi temples that you can see. The only ones really that are still active in very, very northern Iraq and in Kurdistan. All right, so we're now moving along Lake Titicaca, and this is the famous door, the door in the wall, the Amaru Muru door, sometimes called the Devil's Door. You can kind of see it from the Pan American Highway that's going along, well, that's actually not the Pan American Highway, but the main highway going along the west side of Lake Titicaca. As you get up to this doorway, it's this main part is about 6 feet high. It's just about the size of a normal person. Then you have these little channels on the side, and it's kind of bizarre. I mean, why? It's a false door. There's this giant door just carved in like this cliff. And some people claim, it's some interdimensional doorway. People today now like to go there and meditate. People have claimed to have mystical experiences and stuff like that. False doors like this also appear in Egypt, and this is one in Giza. Many Egyptian temples also have false doors, just sort of a fake door carved into a wall or something like that. All right, here's Lake Titicaca. It's the highest navigable lake in the world. It's over 12,000 feet. There are steamships, even allegedly the Bolivian Navy has a submarine in there or something. Bolivia is a landlocked country, so their Navy just gets to play around in Lake Titicaca. Lake Titicaca is also, there are underwater structures in Lake Titicaca, and it's also a very active UFO area. And people who spend a lot of time in Lake Titicaca, you're likely to see a UFO. I can't say I have, but if you stay up all night, it's usually in the middle of the night that UFOs allegedly come out of the water. And most of that too, the very eastern side of Lake Titicaca, half of Lake Titicaca is in Peru, the other half's in Bolivia. Here's some underwater ruins and things like that. There's supposedly near the Island of the Sun, there's supposedly this gold obelisk underwater that they talk about. One of the strange things about Lake Titicaca is that it has seahorses in it. And that's very strange. Seahorses are normally oceanic little creatures. They live in tropical waters like around Indonesia and the Pacific and stuff like that. So the idea that there are seahorses in Lake Titicaca, this is difficult for biologists to really explain. James Churchward, who wrote the Lost Continent of Mu books, this is one of his maps. He traveled around. He was a pretty cool guy. He was a British colonel in India. His guru supposedly showed him a secret library and told him about this lost continent in the Pacific. And then this is about 1890, and said, "Yeah, this is your mission is to go out in the Pacific and find all the evidence for Mu." And so Churchward felt that like Tiwanaku and Lake Titicaca was that South America had been depressed, had been down, and the whole Amazon was what they called the Amazon Sea, and that somehow around Lake Titicaca and Tiwanaku was like a Panama Canal of Atlantean times and stuff like that. And that would be one way to explain that, why how seahorses are in Lake Titicaca. The Gate of the Sun too is kind of an unusual thing. It's part of some other building, and apparently it was moved into place where it is. You see etchings and stuff here, and other buildings, other giant walls would be fitted into that. They're totally gone now, and the Gate of the Sun just kind of sits there by himself. There are giant statues at Tiwanaku. They're wearing turbans, and that was supposedly an Atlantean thing. In my mind, and in my book, Ancient Technology in Peru and Bolivia, what I'm maintaining is that Tiwanaku really was a huge metallurgical site, and that it was for washing ores. There was all this mining was going on there, tin mining, gold mining, copper, you name it, it's all there. And that the Tiwanaku itself was an area too. There was a pyramid with an artificial lake on top of it. They would have had to use what's called a ram pump to actually get water uphill into this lake that was in the pyramid. And then that water was then used, here I'll go back for a second. This is the lake and how it would be, what's it called, the Akapana Pyramid. This unusual little tunnel thing down here at the bottom, and in fact at the time they were telling you, oh, don't take photos of this. This is just still under excavation now, just last 6-7 years in fact. But these little tunnels and things would have apparently been part of this vast complex of water sluices. And when Tiwanaku was really being enacted and in use, water was flowing throughout the city and even pouring down from these pyramids and stuff like that. And in my mind, it was to be washing ores, prepping them to go into the forges where they would be heated, and then literally liquid gold and other metals were coming down. This is the famous Kon-Tiki statue, also made famous by Thor Heyerdahl, who then named some of his ships Kon-Tiki. And what's important with him too is that he has a beard and a mustache. American Indians don't have, and in South America too, they don't have facial hair. They don't have mustaches. They don't have beards. They don't ever shave. Not Native Americans. But this guy has a beard and a mustache, and his hands are in what's called a tiki position. One hand over his heart and one hand on his stomach. This is, if you go to Tahiti and New Zealand and Pacific Islands, this is the well-known tiki position. And in Tahiti and Pacific Islands, you're going to buy easily little pendants of tiki. And he always will have his hands this way, one hand over the stomach, one hand over the heart. This is the Akabana pyramid that was artificial, and water was pumped up to this Andean Cross Lake at the top. So here we go. This is what Bolivia is there, that you see Lake Titicaca. And there's another lake here. Lake Titicaca apparently was seawater originally, and there would have been, it was salt water. But later, as the water from the Andes came down, fresh water, it filled in. And then there is a river that drains from Lake Titicaca called the Desaguadero. And it then goes down to another lake in Bolivia called Lake Popo. And that lake is now salt water. And so it's like all the salt water that was in Lake Titicaca ultimately drained into this other lake. Here's a satellite photo of Lake Titicaca. Lake Titicaca is usually talked about as two lakes. One is the big lake here, and then the smaller lake down to the south. And here we go. So now here's a map of the smaller lake. Now this area, it's this area in here that I'm told that there's a lot of UFO activity, and UFOs are seen coming in and out of the water here. And Bolivians all believe, although part of it's in Peru and then part of it's in Bolivia, and that also they believe there's a sunken city here that's underwater in this area. So this is Lake Titicaca. Lake Titicaca is also famous for its reed boats. Reed boats were used in Iraq and in ancient Egypt and Morocco, also on Easter Island. Reed boats are unsinkable. They'll even pieces of them will keep floating. They have a very shallow draft. They can go over coral reefs and things like that. This is a guy, a Bolivian artist, Ramiro Gonzalez, and he did a book that I thought was kind of cool. And he imagined also Tiwanaku and the whole area around the southern area of Lake Titicaca as being this huge water canal area. You would have gone through Tiwanaku on boats and things like that. And he envisioned also South America as what they call a pole shift scenario, where South America was really like a very long, thin continent, kind of like New Zealand, or sort of like Norway or something, with fjords and stuff like that, and that Tiwanaku was built there during this period, and even the North, South Pole, and Antarctica were in different places. This is the whole idea of what they call pole shift, and that the poles and continents actually move around on the Earth, and that's a number of books have been written about that. Mainstream geologists don't go for that too because it's cataclysmic. All right, here's this is Pumapunku, and the giant. These are Pumapunku is built out of sandstone and granite. Again, now we're looking at these keystone cuts, just like we saw at Ollantaytambo. Now, mainstream archaeologists all admit that the Incas did not build Tiwanaku. Tiwanaku's thousands of years before the Incas. The Incas are actually very near to us in history. The Inca Empire had just formed about 200 years before the Spanish got there. So here are these giant keystone cuts, and these are huge. So each one of these huge slabs of these are sandstone, but yeah, this molten metals of a double T shape or hourglass shape are going to be poured into these things. And they're huge. You wouldn't think that they're going anywhere. And Pumapunku is pretty interesting. It's like some huge cataclysm and tidal wave, probably from Lake Titicaca, hit it and destroyed it. That's a piece of granite right there. Here we go. The special articulation and of carving of these granite blocks. I mean, somebody's doing this with power tools, and we'll see that again. More of these keystone cuts for the clamps. More of them too. Huge clamps. And in fact, where would the metal of the support in these clamps come from? Well, from Tiwanaku itself, because it itself was a huge mining metallurgical complex where the metals were coming from right there. Here we are. This is shooting an Ancient Aliens show with the H blocks. The H blocks are like kind of granite Lego blocks that are like prefab made by like a CAD computer design that's cutting these blocks out and then spewing them out, and then the builders would just take them and fit them together, and they would be locked in. Again, more giant keystone cuts, more keystone cuts around Pumapunku. This is my friend, Christopher Dunn, who's a British engineer. He lives in Illinois and not far from where I live. And he runs a aircraft machine shop. He's just recently retired. But he really showed me a lot of things that are of evidence of power tools. And he works himself with lathes and power tools constantly. And yeah, so if we look at this here, you see these very thin saw marks, and there's drill marks there too. So somebody with really a power saw is making very smooth, clean cuts in this granite, and then they're taking a drill and they're drilling down and making small holes. And in fact, what was going on there was then, get this, at places at Tiwanaku and also other areas of Cusco, the walls were basically wallpapered with sheets of gold. And those holes were for gold pins or bronze pins to go in there and hold the sheets of gold that were everywhere. One historian some years ago, Henrietta Mertz, suggested that the whole story of Jason and the Golden Fleece was a journey to Tiwanaku by these Greek sailors, and they crossed the Atlantic, actually went up the Rio La Plata, which is there near Buenos Aires, up through Paraguay and into Bolivia, and then ultimately to Lake Titicaca and to Tiwanaku, which would have been a city of gold, where the buildings were wallpapered with sheets of gold. This is also a Pumapunku. This is typical trenching by archaeology. You take a site and you trench it, see what's there. Pumapunku was hit by some giant tidal wave and just covered with mud and muck. And then here again are the keystone cuts. This is what you see. And now giant blocks are sitting there on pillars of mud at Pumapunku. Today, like this area, you can't go into this area. The Bolivian archaeologists have recently, and it may be from the Ancient Aliens program, they've decided, like, hey, we need to start excavating this place. So they've now roped off most of the place, and they have guards there to watch everyone. So you wouldn't be able, you have to go on the far side of Pumapunku to see this. But yeah, I mean, this is evidence that Tiwanaku and Pumapunku were hit by some massive tidal wave and mud and muck that destroyed the buildings and then just and buried the city in this mud. Early excavations in the 1930s by a guy named Arthur Poznański. He was a Polish archaeologist, Polish-German. Huge, giant statues like this that are there. This is now in an area of part of Tiwanaku, actually, which is, and Pumapunku and Tiwanaku are just like a kilometer or so apart. And I thought this was very strange. There's parts of it here where it looks like this block has some kind of super cement was put in to fill it in. And it's things like this that Chris Dunn pointed out to me, where you have these curved blocks like this, and it's these inside corners like this where the curved section of the block and the straight sections of the block come together. Now, and this is what requires lathes and power tools to do this. And what's interesting here, and as Chris would point out to me, the monuments in Egypt and the things at Tiwanaku, what mainstream archaeologists are saying is that the builders are bashing this out with a stone hammer in their hand. And you cannot do something like this with a stone hammer in your hand. You need, at the very least, very sharp chisels and ultimately really power tools, diamond saws, grinders, and things like that. This is one of the megalithic doors there, and they're monolithic doors in the sense that they're actual doorways cut out of a single piece of granite. It's lying on its side. This is kind of what the Gate of the Sun is. You can see these holes at the bottom. They have to do with, again, like metal or stone plugs, that would like help hold it up, that would be on the floor to be in there as they put it up, that it would sit on these little stone pins and things like that. You also find these monolithic doors in Persepolis in Iran today. And Persepolis is pretty interesting. And it's the building style and again, just cutting a doorway out of one solid piece of granite, that's what you see there. This is what one of these monolithic doors would look like. And again, so just the articulation, I mean, not only that they're quite heavy, but just to articulate, to cut, and to make these things, again, this requires really precision type instruments. This is in the museum at Tiwanaku, and here's one of the metal clamps poured into the keystone cuts. All right, well, let's now just go briefly to Egypt. And this is Luxor Temple in southern Egypt. And there's keystone cuts there too. And these hourglass ones, and one looks like an axe head, these are keystone cuts. And they're the same as the ones that are at Tiwanaku. This is the Temple of Edfu. And it has blocks of stone, also with keystone cuts on it. But this is an example of a wall, a structure in Egypt, that's being built out of older blocks. They're recycling blocks that were, none of these blocks or keystone cuts here, and some are just by themselves. They've even matched some up. But yeah, this wall has nothing to do with the original builders or where these keystone cuts would be. They would not be on a wall like this. They can't be on a vertical wall. So this is Egyptians reusing older blocks to build this wall, ones that have keystone cuts in them. All right, now we're going to go to Vietnam, to central Vietnam, right near Da Nang. This is an ancient city, a megalithic city called My Son, or My Son. It also has keystone cuts too, exactly like the ones that are at Ollantaytambo and at Tiwanaku and Puma Punku. Exact same kind of T-shaped, and also the hourglass keystone cuts, like you see in Egypt. And the people who built this were called the Kam people. They were the Kam, they're megalith builders. And in fact, ancient Egypt was called Kamet, or Kamet. So in theory, wherever you hear the word Kam or Kem, that's the word for ancient Egypt. But this is in Vietnam. More of the keystone cuts. This is basalt, very hard stone. These people too, whoever's building this, they're using the same technique and power tools to build this. This is what My Son looks like. And the capital of the Kam, and by the way, Cambodia is named after these people too, the Kam. This is what My Son looks like. And their capital, the Kam people's capital, was right off the coast, and it was this island called Kulao Kam. And so these people, they were megalithic builders. Their main capital was actually an island off the coast of Vietnam. And it would appear that they were crossing the Pacific Ocean, and they were somehow involved in probably the building at Tiwanaku and also in Peru and Sacsayhuaman. The Kam also have a lot of similarities with the Olmecs. We'll see that in a minute. These are some Kam statues. The Kam also, a lot of the Kam people were very African. They were supposedly Hindu and Buddhist. Here's another Kam statue. He looks very African. He's got also the tight hair. He's got a wide nose. This is a Kam statue there. This is supposedly Shiva with third eye in the forehead. This is a statue from My Son. This is also a statue from the Kam in My Son, and this looks very Mayan. I mean, or Olmec. And if you were to take this and show it to somebody in Mexico, they would probably say, "Oh yeah, that's a Mayan statue." Graham also showed that photo of the pyramid in Indonesia. which also looks like a Mayan pyramid. All right, this guy too, he's a cam guy, and he's got the beard and the mustache, also the long earlobes. And that's a big thing with Buddha and Buddhists. Buddha is always depicted as having very, very long ears and earlobes. Here's a female cam statue. Has a lot. It's a lot of similarities with statues in India and other statues in Southeast Asia, but also statues that are in Mexico and Central America. This is at Angkor Wat in Cambodia, and the same keystone cuts and clamps are there too. And in fact, when I was at My Son in Vietnam, and I showed them to our guide, the keystone cuts, and he had never seen them before. He had no idea what they were. I had to explain them I had to explain them to the guide, what it was all about. So these were Japanese excavations at Angkor Wat, and this is one of the clamps, just like the ones at Tiwanaku and Pumapunku. They also at Angkor Wat and other areas around there, also these seem to be these monolithic doors. All right, also in Indonesia, as Graham pointed out, megalith building does still continue. These are some guys on the island of Nias, which is off of Sumatra. And this is a photo taken by some Dutch guy about 1908 or something of them moving this big megalithic block, which may have already been, somewhere else, and they're just removing it, we don't know. This is at Bada Valley in Sulawesi. Graham also went there with Santa, and Jennifer and I went there some years ago. This is a very strange place. So it's in Bada Valley. It's in central Sulawesi. Very difficult to get here. It's a high mountain valley. They claim there that this is where rice began, and the most oldest primitive versions of rice. This is what Bada Valley looks like when you can get up there. It was only 10 years ago that they built a road to go into this area, into this place. It also seems to be a gold mining area. Whoops. So you have these unusual statues, very kind of sort of tiki type statues. We'll just look at a couple of them. Here's the really big one. And what's interesting to look at this guy with the nose is the eyes. This also very well made. They don't know who made them. They think that they're at least 6,000 years old. But as you look around the eyes and the nose and these eyebrows, it appears that, again, power tools are being used. I mean, it's very, very perfect, precise, of just cutting of the stone. And you cannot do this really, as far as I'm concerned, without power tools. What you also have in Bada Valley are these granite stone jars. And these are also very difficult to make. I mean, somebody, again, apparently power tools, I mean, they took a granite boulder, turned it into a big jar, and then hollowed it out. And we don't know what for. No one knows why they would do this. They're just lying around, either broken or just in somebody's farmer's field. They don't do anything with them. They don't know what to do with them. So why they would be here, you can see a broken piece. And yeah, so somebody with power tools is just doing this, and they had some purpose. I mean, we don't know what. But again, archaeologists would think, wow, this would have taken a long time to bash this out and create this, but with power tools, it would be done quite quickly. There's a similar place in Laos called the Plain of Jars, and it also has all of these stone jars, they call them. And they don't know what they're for. They have no idea. They don't know who made them. They don't know how old they are. They're utterly baffled by it. This is another place also in northern Cambodia called Preah Vihear, and it's a lot like Machu Picchu. It's a megalithic building, and it also has the keystone cuts there too. So the idea that people separately around the world are going to invent by themselves this unusual way of fastening megalithic blocks independently is impossible. I mean, basically the same builders with their power tools and things, they're making all of these buildings all over the world. Let's go back to Peru and Bolivia. This is what architects conceived Pumapunku to be like. So this is maybe what that building looked like originally. Here's the H blocks again. being fitted. They're trying to figure out, what this building even looked like. And it's pretty futuristic kind of place. All destroyed now. I mean, just some tidal wave and earthquake just completely wiped it out. At the museum there, this is what had to happen. But, so here you have, these natives in their, simple cotton tunics. They've got their little campfire here. They're melting metals, and then they're pouring them into the clamps. So it's this oddball mix of very primitive with what is so incredibly sophisticated. But the mainstream archaeology, they don't get it. This is what one of these H blocks would look like. I mean, the articulation and just the creation of all that. Now, this is actually a pyramid that archaeologists have not acknowledged yet. It's near to Tiwanaku, and you can see it from Tiwanaku, but there's a village there, and basically the villagers are looting this pyramid. And we tried to go there one day and drive with our minibus, and we went partly down to the village. But our guide told us, he said, no, we shouldn't go into the village because the villagers won't like this. Because they're looting this pyramid. What came out of that pyramid and around it is a couple of unusual objects. One is the Potiki monolith. It's a granite monolith, and it's today in the Gold Museum in La Paz, but you can't see it. Although when we went, it is on Ancient Aliens, and Ancient Aliens paid to have them bring this out of the vault. It has Sumerian writing on it. Okay, two types. Now, Sumerians also, they wrote in a hieroglyphic writing, and they also wrote in a cuneiform. So there's along the thigh of the monolith is Sumerian writing. And what was also found in this area is this thing. This is called the Fuente Magna Bowl. And the Fuente Magna Bowl also has Sumerian writing on it, but both types. It has Sumerian hieroglyphic writing on it and Sumerian cuneiform. And it's decoded. I talk about this in my book on ancient technology in Peru and Bolivia. This is the guy. It came from his house, Maximiliano. And he used it for a while. He had he fed his pigs through this bowl. And finally, around 1960, in fact, and then archaeologists somehow kind of saw this, and they were like, hey, maybe this is some ancient artifact, but it should be in a museum or something. And they traded him a house for it. Yeah, and they said, well, give us this bowl, and we'll give you a new, house to live in. And, houses there aren't like nice houses in Colorado or anything, but... So anyway, so the Fuente Magna Bowl is a time bomb for mainstream archaeologists. It can't be there. But it's in a museum now in La Paz. And it's on display. Bolivian archaeologists, I'll say, yeah, this is real. I firmly believe that if this bowl had been found in Peru, it would be suppressed by archaeologists. I mean, the mainstream archaeologists in Peru, under pressure from American and other archaeologists, they would not put it in any museum. But Bolivia is kind of a renegade country, and they don't want to be told what to do. And they don't want Americans to tell them, how to run their country or anything like that. So they put it in the thing. I'll just run back to it. So this is it. I mean, this cannot be there. I mean, it's a Sumerian artifact in Bolivia, and it's thousands of years old. So I mean, there's even more to it than that. I mean, and here's the thing with this. Mainstream archaeologists, all they can do is just not talk about it. I mean, they can never say anything about it. And so they won't. You'll see it on Ancient Aliens. It's in an episode. Go back and watch that one. It's a good one. But this is not going to be in a National Geographic special. I don't think, although, I mean, maybe they will do that. I mean, they should, because this is earth-shattering. This changes the history of South America completely. So anyway, we're still back to, this is the museum in Tiwanaku. This is what some of the guys look like, some pottery. This guy looks very much like an Aymara Indian, the people who live around Lake Titicaca and stuff today. But here's this guy. Now, these guys are from Tiwanaku too. The guy at the bottom looks very much like a Chinese guy. The guy at the top has the thick mustache and beard and stuff like that. He looks like some Mediterranean, Phoenician guy or something like that. He's from Tiwanaku as well. So you have, you've got Europeans, you've got Orientals, and then you've got Native Americans. And now, also at Tiwanaku, you have these cranial deformation. Dolichocephalus, as they call it, cone heads. By the way, this display has been removed from the museum now. You cannot see it. It's all blanked out with brown paper. So some of these are, they have the extended craniums, and you weren't supposed to take any pictures there, but rules are meant to be broken, right? So, all right, now let's go to the coast in Peru. We'll go to Ica and to Paracas, and we'll look at stuff there. This is really, because it's so dry, this is a very good area to look at the unusual skulls and craniums. Tons and tons of literally hundreds of these unusual elongated skulls, and they're a lot. They're in many of the museums in Peru. The area there is so dry that skeletal material and craniums and things like that are well preserved. I mean, these craniums really are unusual, and they are in many cases double or triple the size of a normal human's cranium. Now, and so, the idea that some of these guys are somehow extraterrestrials, the Anunnaki, there is a way to manipulate the craniums of infants, and we know that people did this. And the whole idea, I mean, it's baffling, again, to archaeologists. And now, this is the Chongos Pyramid near Paracas. Many of these unusual craniums and things like that have been found here. I mean, some of these guys, they are some weird-looking dudes, and not the kind of guy you want to, meet in a dark alley or something, Now, this is a very unusual one. This is also from Paracas. Now, before, when you're still an infant, the plates in your head are going to fuse and things like that, and they ultimately fuse. But this is a very unusual cranium, and it's fused in a different way than a human's cranium would be. And of all of the elongated skulls that are there in Peru, I'll go back to this again. This one is the most unusual, and people who would say that, yeah, these guys are not really human beings as we are. They're something different, and that's part of the idea, that you would actually have people who are born, rather than it being a cranial deformation, manipulating the cranium, but they naturally have these elongated heads. And this guy, in theory, would be one. They've had some infants and supposedly fetuses, too, that have them. This guy, tree panning, is something also that went on in Peru and all over the world. And that is cutting a big hole in the head for various reasons. We don't know exactly why people were tree panned. This guy had a gold plate put in his head, and it healed later, and his skull grew over the gold plate. A lot of the mummies and stuff there in Peru have red hair. In the same area is what's called the Candlestick of the Andes. And in fact, in my mind, it's a scene really from the ocean. This was perhaps, it would seem like some signal to seafarers, also even people in airships possibly. One idea too, that this is San Pedro cactus, which is a hallucinogenic cactus in Peru. It's only just south of there that is the Nazca Plain with all the strange lines and figures and things like that. Archaeologists don't have a good explanation for it either. They're not. Maria Reike studied the lines for 40 or 50 years, and she could never really figure out what was going on. She didn't think that they were airstrips for aliens to land on or anything like that, but still she couldn't really explain it. And there's lines, there's geometric figures and other figures etched into the plain. And that's no big deal. I mean, they just by digging a little bit into the plain, you can expose it. But again, one thing almost everyone admits is that it's like to be seen from the air. And there's not much point in really, doing all this without seeing them from the air. And one explanation, too, was also hallucinogenic drugs, and that shamans would take hallucinogens and then project themselves astrally over the Nazca Plain, and this gave them something to look at, as they were flying around. Okay, so, the whole thing of this cranial deformation, the Olmecs did it, too, and this is another thing, too, with the mainstream, is that this cranial deformation is something that goes on all over the world, not just in Peru. And the Olmecs have it too. These are some Olmec statues from Comacalco, which is an Olmec Mayan city along the Gulf Coast near to Villahermosa. This is what these guys look like, with the cone heads and the coffee bean eyes and stuff like that. I mean, there were some weird looking dudes. This is a pumpkin-headed guy from the Yucatan. So this is actually in the museum in Merida in Yucatan. I don't know if it's still there, but so this guy had his face was squashed in rather than elongated. So here's one of the ways that you would do this to a child, and we know that this did go on. There's no question about that. That the children had these pressure put on their cranium, because when you're still a baby, really, the plates in your head haven't fused, and so you, like the Chinese foot binding or something like that, you can manipulate these heads and things like that, and it's possible to create these cone heads too, apparently. The Olmecs themselves were completely unknown until around 1940. And in 1940, the Mexican government brought archaeologists from all over the world to a big conference, and there they laid out the Olmecs, and they said, we've discovered another civilization, a culture that's pre-Mayan. And they had no name for it. They called them the Olmecs. And it all started with digging up these giant basalt heads along the coast of around Veracruz and stuff like that. They were mainly buried. They weigh about 20 tons. Most Olmec, at least the colossal heads, they look very African. And again, now, and most people when they look at them, these are Olmec guys too, giant boulders. These are in Guatemala. That's one of the things that they're just discovering, and I talk about in my book, how the Olmecs were on both the Pacific coast and the Atlantic coast. And in fact, they stretched from all over Mexico and deep down into Central America to Panama and even to Colombia and stuff like that. Tomorrow we'll show some things. Very well made, finely carved heads, again, buried and things like that. This guy, and it looks very much like a cam. He looks in some ways sort of Oriental, also kind of African. Today, many of these colossal heads are at a really good museum in Jalapa, Mexico, which is near Veracruz. But this is what they found them in these jungle areas, and this is what they like La-Venta. They excavated it. It had really good drainage and, in a sense, plumbing. So the whole Olmec area, see, that's what they call the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, and it's the narrowest part of Mexico, and so it's also the narrowest part between the Pacific and the Atlantic. And the Olmecs really, their heartland in many Comacalco and La-Venta are near the Atlantic, but a lot of Olmec stuff is here in the Pacific, and particularly in Guatemala and stuff like that. And actually, cities like Monte Alban, which is in that area too, there would be an Olmec city too, in my mind. Mainstream archaeologists say that the Zapotecs actually built Monte Alban. But anyway, okay, this is also an Olmec statue, which is at the Jalapa Museum, and it looks very Egyptian. And he's wearing like a false beard, as the Egyptians wore, this beard. This is an Olmec guy too, and he's holding a rubber ball. The rubber ball, the game the rubber ball game, the ball court game, was played all through Central America and as far north as Utah. And if you go to Hovenweep or to Wupatki near the Grand Canyon in Arizona, you're going to see ball courts. And the rubber, they would have to use those rubber balls also coming from Central America and really the jungle heartland of Chiapas and areas like that. Now, this is also an unusual, one of the colossal heads of the Olmecs. And what's strange about this, and mainstream archaeologists have noticed this too, and they don't have an explanation for it, it's how somebody was defacing this with these little dish marks on the helmet. What's going on here, really, it seems, is that somebody with a power tool, like some kind of grinder or something, was just purposely defacing this and making these little scoop marks with his power grinder. Something like that. Also at the Olmec Park, these also small dish marks and drill marks, it's like somebody, again, with a power tool was just, making this, just like playing with his power tool, ultimately. This is also at Comacalco, which we saw on the map, and it just shows you some of the pottery and statues that were found at Comacalco, and they are bizarre. And now, get this. You look at some of these guys, I mean, some of them look like spacemen, others like Africans, Orientals, all kinds of weird guys, some very, very Chinese. The Mexican government and that museum, they have removed this display. I was there about 2 years ago, and they took it off display. Again, perhaps because of the Ancient Aliens show, because, this is the kind of thing on Ancient Aliens you'd go like, whoa, who are these guys? And mainstream archaeologists realized, these guys are really just too weird, and let's get them off display. How about that? At La Venta, they also found what are called this was called a votive offering. It's out of jade. There's these little tall things in the back. They're called jade celts. They're a kind of a tool that would be like like an adze type tool. But what it also had on it was Olmec writing, and an expert came. This was only, this was in 1999, and it only appeared in U.S. News and World Report. But this guy he came from Beijing, and he was the Chinese expert on Shang Dynasty early Chinese writing. And then he said that, the writing that's on these jade celts is Shang Chinese writing. This is in my book on the Olmecs that's over there. Okay, the Egyptians also did this cranial deformation. This is Meritaten, who was one of the daughters of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, sister of Tutankhamun. So she too has this elongated, unusual head. Tutankhamun is a cone head too, and although they never talk about it in. When you talk about Tutankhamun, this is a statue and another statue from his tomb. This is Tutankhamun's own statue of himself. So he also has this elongated head going back and basically a cranium about twice the size of us. These are the Ubaid figures from Sumeria. They're from about 4,000 BC, so they're like 6,000 years old. They're real. They are these so-called Nephilim figures. They have also these elongated craniums. They have what's called coffee bean eyes, which is a kind of an unusual, depiction of the eyes. And then they have the elongated craniums. So these are, in a sense, these Anunnaki figures. And they're real. Again, whether they're just humans with these weird elongated heads, or there's some kind of extraterrestrials or extraterrestrial hybrids, we don't really know. But the Sumerians, that's we were looking at the Fuente Magna Bowl at Tiwanaku, and that's from these guys. Okay, the Chinese. There's supposedly these Taoist immortals and stuff in China. I mean, this guy's an extreme conehead, to say the least. These guys were doing this in China. These are some other Chinese guys. They have what are called the pumpkin head or jaguar head. I mean, it's, why they're doing this, whether people would naturally look like this, is bizarre. They were doing this in the Pacific Northwest too. And this is a Chinook Indian from the Seattle area. And they had also these elongated skulls. I went to high school in Missoula, Montana, and to the University of Montana, and the largest freshwater lake west of the Mississippi is a lake just north of Missoula called Flathead Lake. Well, it's named Flathead Lake because the Flathead Indians lived there, and they were called the Flathead Indians because they were coneheads and had the flat, elongated heads. So the idea too, it's almost like with the people who are doing the cranial deformation, they all say, or as part of their mythology, that they're doing it because the elite also had these cone heads. So at the very least, they're imitating this, royalty that are coming from Samaria or something like that. Now, this deformation, this is happening in Central Africa. This is in an area of the Congo. This little kid, he's having his head bound. He's going to be a conehead. This is taken about 1920 by Dutch anthropologists. So this is what his head would have looked like. In the island of Vanuatu, which was hit by that typhoon only just some months ago, it was in the news, they also do that too. And also the Kurds. And right up until the 1960s, really this was being still done in northern Iraq and in Vanuatu. So I thought I would throw this in. In 1934, in Wyoming, in the San Pedro Mountains of Wyoming, some prospectors dynamited a cliff face in the San Pedro Mountains. And what they found sitting there was this tiny miniature mummy sitting in like a meditation position. And he's known as the San Pedro mummy. Here's a X-ray of him. I mean, he was only about 2 feet tall, seemed to be a fully developed adult person, yet he was very small. He disappeared. I'll go back. This is what he looked like. He was kept. In 1950, he was sold to somebody. And it was privately held, and their photos. And at that point, he disappeared. And no one knows where it is. And that's why this guy's offering $10,000 for it. I mean, somebody has this thing somewhere, and he keeps it, again, it may be suppressed. This is not the kind of thing that the mainstream archaeologists, they just don't like stuff like this. They don't like skeletons of giants who are 8, 9, 10 feet tall. They don't like skeletons of little people, too, who are only 2 feet tall. The interesting thing, too, he's in a special meditation posture, supposedly, I'm told. Another Colorado thing, this is called the Granby Idol. It was found near Granby, Illinois, which is kind of north-central Colorado, near the Wyoming border. I haven't been to Granby. But this was found there, and it's carved out of basalt. He's kind of doing a thumbs up kind of thing. He's supposed to be some kind of Olmec thing. There's strange writing on his stomach. We don't, and he's kind of disappeared too. There's photographs of it. We don't know where he is, but yeah, just exactly who he was and what the writing is there that maybe it's kind of Sumerian. Now, the Salmon Ruins in New Mexico, which is right near Aztec, New Mexico, they also found an unusual slab there in the 1930s, and it had elephants carved on it. So, you have to wonder what elephants were doing in New Mexico. And they're like, well, were they either mastodons or perhaps they were elephants brought out from Southeast Asia? How am I doing here? Okay, I can go a few more minutes. So, all right, now we were talking about the Olmecs and everything. Let's go right now briefly to Colombia. I was just there briefly, or a few months ago. And at San Agustin, and starting in the 1930s, and a lot of the excavations went right up until the 1970s, they also started uncovering all these giant statues. And this is an area kind of getting near to Ecuador. Weird statues, also with big noses, very Egyptian kind of look to them. In my mind, kind of this is a Olmec thing, or similar to Olmecs. This guy too, like with a false beard and stuff like that. Some of these guys are like gorgons with big teeth, some kind of a monster. Other guys are wearing special kind of Egyptian-like breastplates and turbans and things like that again. There's other statues there of birds and things like that. They're all megalithic, largely buried. Strange granite tomb buildings, also very finely cut. And it was also megalithic, sort of tomb, sarcophagi kind of stuff. This is what it looks like around San Agustin. It's high up in the mountains. It's an oddball spot. And apparently also what was going on here is gold mining. It was a gold mining place. It looks like they had power tools to do some of it. This is what it looks like today. Look at this statue here. I mean, this is, again, like that statue I was showing you at Bada Valley. This appears to be made with very, precision power tools. If you look around his eyes and nose and his cheeks and stuff like that, yeah, these are very, very sharp, sweeping lines on his face. I mean, it's not something you can do with a rock hammer in your hand. You have also dolmens and things like that. A lot of the sites were buried. There's another site also nearby called Tierra Dentro. It also has a bunch of statues and underground tombs and things like that. Weird statues, very similar to San Agustin. It really would be, I think, the same people doing it. It's also a gold mining area, high up in the mountains in a volcano. This guy was wearing some kind of oddball backpack, almost looks like some jetpack or something like that. This is another statue also from Tierra Dentro. Some woman, she's wearing a very elaborate kind of hat and stuff like that. And again, you have to wonder, this was a pottery that was found there. I mean, he looks like some cool space guy. So yeah, I mean, this is what they look like. The people at San Agustin, they must have looked like him and dressed like him. Now, the gold, all this gold was taken out of San Agustin and Tierra Dentro, and it's now in the Gold Museum in Bogota. And so here's some of the guys there. I mean, here's one of the gold figures. I mean, this is an ancient thing coming out of Bogota. And yeah, he's some kind of weird-looking guy. He's looking like some spaceman or something like that. This is also in the Gold Museum. These are all pretty small gold pieces. I call him the fireman. And it looks like he has either a big mustache or a big gold plate in his nose. There at the Gold Museum there too are like gold sun discs and things like that. There would have, and that's what was at the Coricancha, the Sun Temple in Cuzco, was a big gold disc like this. And even what looked like, again, like power tool pieces or something, rotary things. And in fact, they call this a rotary disc, like it's some bronze and gold saw, blade or something like that. This is also on display there. These are crystals and pieces of amber, and they're drilled through. So, and this is on display there. They're using what would have to be precision power drills to drill into these pieces. This is also the museum there. A lot of these guys were also coneheads there. So kind of winding it up here. There's a piece of pottery. This is what one of the guys looked like. Let's go back to him real quick. Looks kind of oriental. He's a cool guy. I mean, pretty interesting art. And so many of the people look either like monsters, they look oriental, they look African, many look Mediterranean. And it is at the Gold Museum that has the famous gold airplanes. So you have the gold airplanes, and in fact, Giorgio of Ancient Aliens, if you join his little club, you get one of these gold airplane pins that he gives you. They're cool. And he's a great guy, too, an old friend of mine. So, yeah, so these are what the gold airplanes look like. They're small. Mainstream archaeologists, of course, I mean, it can't be gold airplanes. They must be something else. So, they're saying, well, they're like flying fishes or something like that. But flying fish, birds and flying fishes do not have tails like this and other things. They're They seem to be, basically kind of an airplane model. Gold, and even they do have gold flying fish there. Here's one, So yeah, they're making gold flying fishes, but it would seem that these other things are somehow kind of airplanes. Gold is indestructible, by the way. All gold of ancient times still exists today. You cannot destroy gold. It's indestructible. So, I mean but you can't really date a gold piece either. But you can take it in situ. So the whole idea of ancient flight and Vimanas, the Ramayana, and which is part of the Mahabharata and so many of the ancient Indian texts. I mean, they talk about Vimanas, flying machines, and they're very specific that they are flying vehicles. Eric's Chariots of the Gods. This is Rama in his flying chariot. This is in the Bangkok airport and in Thailand, which is really a Buddhist country. But every Buddhist, I mean, there are millions and millions of Hindus and Buddhists all know the story, and they all know about Vimanas and the flying machines of ancient India, in a sense. To have flying machines really like today and power tools, you need electricity. And we know they had electricity in ancient times. You need machines, you need cogged wheels. We have like the Antikythera device that was found off the Antikythera island, 1900 in the Aegean. Once it was studied in the 1950s, archaeologists, and it was American archaeologists too, that studied it. They were amazed. They just never imagined that in the ancient world there was anything like this. Cogged machines and wheels, what would be like a computer. They think the Antikythera device was actually a computer that was like an astrolabe, and you could dial up constellations and perhaps use it for navigation and things like that. And it has a date on it too. It was built in the island of Rhodes. At the Temple of Dendera, there's a number of reliefs like this. They appear also to show electricity in ancient Egypt. You see here the Jed pillars on the bottom, and cables are coming out the back. It appears to be some kind of probably like a big lamp or something. The filament is the snake in the middle. It's absolutely real, and there's a number of these at Dendera. Mainstream archaeologists have to explain this too, but it can't be like some electrical device. So their explanation is that this is a lotus flower, and this is the aroma of the lotus flower. That's their explanation. I think it's an electrical device. So yeah, that they had the idea that ancient Egyptian temples were lit even by electrical lights. And in my book, Technology of the Gods, we get into that. Many ancient temples supposedly had lights that never went out inside them and stuff like that. And it's probably that, your average person in their little hut probably maybe didn't have electric lights, but in the temples they did. And that was almost part of the religion and stuff. At Abydos is this famous lintel. It's high up on the... let's go back to it real quick. And this kind of famous, this thing that supposedly looks like a helicopter, this thing down here also like a plane, and then there's this plane right here, also looks like kind of a jet or something like that. This is real. Mainstream archaeologists have to explain this too. And their explanation really is that, and it does work for some of them, that it's two hieroglyphs superimposed on each other, and so then it suddenly looks like a helicopter or a plane or something like that. But I've been told by archaeologists that this one right here in the middle, this jet plane one, that they can't figure that one out. And it's that the explanation that it's two known hieroglyphs put together, it doesn't work for that. The idea, too, that in ancient times they had heavy machinery like backhoes and bulldozers and graders and stuff like that is interesting. And we have this thing, this gold pendant from Panama. And this is also real. It's in the museum in Panama City. It's made of gold. The stone is inset on the top of it. They're not exactly sure what kind of stone it is. But what it seems to depict is a backhoe, some kind of heavy machinery. It's called a zoomorphic pendant. It's about 6 inches long. This is the top again. This is the front. He's got even a little breastplate and stuff like that. This is again what it looks like. It looks like it has a digging backhoe kind of thing on it at the very back. And this is what it would kind of look like as heavy sort of machinery. So in a sense, the idea here is that, yeah, somebody was using, heavy machinery, heavy grader or something like that. People witnessed it. And it's like a monster to them. And so they create, this, what's called a zoomorphic pendant out of it. And actually, if you're coming from Illinois, where Caterpillar and John Deere are, I mean, heavy machinery, graders, backhoes, bulldozers, and all that stuff are so important to our civilization today. Just working with the terrain and moving earth and stuff around, and it appears in ancient times they did that too. They found what appears to be a model of a glider in a tomb in Saqqara, and this is well known. The whole idea of Vimanas, people having these airships that are flying from one place to another. The ancient Chinese have stories like that. So the idea of ancient people having flight and flying places is a well-known. The Kebra Nagast, which is the sacred book of Ethiopia, also talks about King Solomon and his son, Menelik, and this Queen of Sheba, and she's got her radio over here too, so listening to Art Bell Coast to Coast. And again, like Assyrian things, here you got the winged disc. It's the flying disc, and you got three guys up there. We'll see you later. We're taking off. When you read the Ramayana, Mahabharata, they talk about these horrific wars. They have airships, they have these Vimanas, they have all these incredible weapons. It reads like Flash Gordon or Buck Rogers, and they're blasting each other and destroying whole cities. I mean, it's this devastating wars and things like that. And so, archaeologists figured, it's all just, wild science fiction from ancient Indians and stuff like that. But when British and Indian archaeologists started excavating at Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa in Pakistan, and this is one of the seals. This is some kind of extinct Brahma bull that no longer exists today, a proto-cattle of India and stuff like that. But when archaeologists got to the street level at Mohenjo-Daro, what they found was people lying dead in the streets. Some doom had taken over this whole city, and everyone was just killed. And then the desert came in, and I mean, nobody buried the dead or anything like that. The desert came in and just these cities in dust and stuff like that for thousands of years. And then it wasn't really until the late 1940s that archaeologists uncovered this. In many cases, they're holding hands and stuff like that. It's like some atomic war just wiped these people out. So here's Vishnu flying around on Garuda. I mean, throughout India and all through Southeast Asia and stuff like that, the idea that they're flying around, they have these flying vehicles, except, the idea they don't really have knowledge of airplanes and stuff like that, so it's got to be these chariots being drawn by eagles or swans or something like that. In the Ramayana is a story of Rama and Ayodhya. He supposedly lives in this forest over here. His wife is kidnapped by this other guy, or maybe she runs away with him. In the story, she's kidnapped. And then supposedly he takes her to a place called Lanka. Some people think it is Sri Lanka. This would be, Rama's chariot. They all have these Vimanas that they're flying around in the movie, or in the book, I mean. And these are these satellite photos from southern India going in. And this is what they call Rama's Bridge. And apparently, like at Key West, going out along the Florida Keys, there was like this ancient causeway and road that really went from southern India and Tamil Nadu area to the northern part of Sri Lanka. And most of it is underwater right now, but not much underwater. It's in maybe 30, 40 feet of water. Ships move through this area. They have to be careful not to get grounded and stuff like that. And that is also, this whole thing of Rama's Bridge is the story also in the Ramayana. There was a book that was supposedly found in the Royal Baroda Library called the Vimanika Shastra. in the 1920s, and it was a book all about Vimanas, how they were made, the power system and stuff like that. Talked about the Rukma Vimana. It was apparently like a flying saucer kind of craft. These drawings were done in the 1920s by Sanskrit scholars who were like going through it. There's no illustrations of the book or anything. The Tripura Vimana was a kind of a cigar-shaped, elongated craft. The Shakuna Vimana was like a winged type craft. And then other texts, and I talk about them in my book on Vimanas, often they talk about Mercury. Mercury is as part of the power system of the Vimanas. And Mercury's an element, it's a metal, it's a liquid, it's a conductor. Mercury in Western tradition was the messenger god. He flew through the air. The symbol of Mercury is the caduceus, which is also the medical symbol, and it's kind of a vortex type thing. The whole idea here, too, is that there's a kind of a Mercury engine, a gyro. Mercury, because it's a liquid and a metal and a conductor, you can put electricity in it. So, yeah. And, I realize I'm out of time now. And that was the interesting thing here. There's one last little thing. If you go to Area 51 in Nevada, where supposedly they're, retro-engineering alien craft or just making their own flying saucer or whatever, there is a town there. And that town is called Mercury. And you can't go there because there's a highway sign for it. It says, Mercury over here, and you can see it, but you need a security pass to go into that city. But so, yeah, the town for the scientists in Area 51 is basically called Mercury, Nevada. So that is my presentation for tonight, and tomorrow we will get into more of this, and also Tesla and obelisks, and then we will go to the moon and Mars. So thanks very much. Thanks. Well, we'll see you all tomorrow, I hope.
David Hatcher Childress, the voice of Ancient Aliens, one of the most prolific researchers, David Hatcher Childress.
Ground control to Major Tom. Ground control to Major Tom. Take your protein pills and put your helmet on. 10. Ground control 9, to Major Tom. 8, 7, 6. Commencing 5, countdown, engines on. 3, 2. Check ignition 1, and may God's love be with you. This is ground control to Major Tom. You've really made the grade, and the papers want to know whose shirts you wear. Now it's time to leave the capsule if you dare. This is Major Tom to ground control. I'm stepping through the door, and I'm floating in a most peculiar way, and the stars look very different today. For here am I sitting in a tin can,